That's it. This little closet is her big legacy. The sentence slices through the air like a dull blade, casual but meant to cut. The chuckle that follows twists the knife. I don't move. I just stand in the far corner of the storage room pretending to inventory a shelf of dust-coated file boxes while three senior officers, none of them mine, stare into the open doorway of my uniform closet like it's some kind of sad joke. I can hear them behind me. I can feel them. Captain Nora Walker, 36 years old, 14 years in service, and apparently still invisible. They don't know I'm here, or maybe they do and just don't care. My pulse flutters, but I keep my back to them. I stare at the tidy row of coats I've hung with my own hands. 15 of them. Pressed, labeled, carefully folded. Each from a different year, a different assignment, a different chapter of a career they'll never understand. The room itself isn't much. 10 by 12 feet. An old supply closet that hadn't seen light in years until I asked for the key. I swept it, painted it, installed lighting, and brought in 2 rows of custom wooden hangers. No fanfare, no funding, just me and a screwdriver over a long weekend. It's not a museum. It's not supposed to be. It's just memory quiet and folded. And apparently to them it's laughable. That one's from Afghanistan, right? One of the officers says. Probably still smells like diesel. The others laugh. My stomach turns. My cheeks burn even though no one's looking at me. I clench my jaw, still facing the opposite wall. I don't speak. I don't move. But inside, something uncoils. A bitterness I've kept buried too long begins to rise. They don't see what those uniforms meant. They don't know about the woman who bled through the sleeves of the second one, or the man who died the day after the 5th was issued, or the frostbite in my toes during the storm that soaked the 8th. They don't see the tags I sewed into the lining of each jacket date's location's initials, just 3 things per piece. Enough for me to remember, enough for no one else to ever know. To them, this is a sad little closet, an oddball's hobby. But to me, it's the only place I've ever told the truth. I start to turn to say something to defend it, or maybe to defend myself when I hear footsteps behind the officers. Someone else has entered. The voices go quiet. There's a pause. Then a new voice, deeper, slower, weathered, asks, "Who curated this silence?" I turn and see him. General Harlan Briggs, silver-starred, stone-faced, and barely visible through a sea of stunned captains. He steps into the closet doorway without waiting for an answer. The 3 officers who mocked me shuffle back like children caught sneaking into someone else's room. The general stares into the closet. He doesn't speak right away. Just reaches out, slowly lifts the sleeve of the 3rd uniform in the row. Then he pulls it down from the hanger, runs his hand over the fabric, reads the tag. He takes a breath, and then whispers, not to anyone, not for show, but like a man remembering something important. "This is legacy." The room goes silent. I don't speak. I don't need to. Because in that moment, the walls say enough. The fabric says enough. The dust, the seams, the faded Velcro, and the sweat-stained patches, they say enough. Legacy. That word echoes through the closet louder than any applause I've ever received. General Briggs turns to me, finally meeting my eyes. He nods once, then carefully folds the uniform and places it on the small cedar bench in the corner. He doesn't explain. He doesn't need to. But the 3 officers who mocked me, they're frozen. And I finally turn to face them, not angry, not triumphant, just whole. Let me tell you how we got here. I was never meant to stand out, and maybe that's exactly why I did. I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. Flat skies, wide lawns, and a father who mowed the grass every Sunday like it was a sacred ritual. He didn't talk much about his time in Vietnam, just enough to make it clear that service was serious and silence was a part of it. My mother taught 4th grade at the local school. I was her quietest student. I had 2 brothers, Jake and Rob, both louder, taller, and more charismatic than I ever managed to be. Jake went into finance. Rob joined the Marines straight out of high school and came home with a chest full of stories and a limp he never explained. I wasn't brave like him. I wasn't charming like Jake. I was orderly, practical. I liked routine. I liked systems. I liked making things that seemed chaotic. Work. Maybe that's why I joined the army. Not to lead a charge. To make the wheels turn where no one could see them. I enlisted at 22 a year after finishing my business degree. I didn't tell many people. I just walked into the recruiter's office, asked where the need was, and said yes. They put me in logistics. I learned early that nobody respects the logistics officer until the trucks don't arrive, until the rations run out, until a storm scrambles the supply chain and the forward unit's screaming for med kits and winter gear. That's when they call you. And when you get it done, no one cheers. They just move on like nothing ever broke in the first place. That's the life of someone like me, the fixer who doesn't get named. My first deployment was in Germany. Cold mornings, endless checklists, a senior NCO who told me my handwriting looked too girly for combat ops logs. He meant it as a joke, I think. I rewrote every log that day in block capitals, but the turning point the moment I realized who I really was came in 2012 during a desert operation near the Horn of Africa. A supply route had been bombed, communications were unreliable, morale was worse. I was pulled into a field tent with 3 senior officers panicking over how to reroute food and med-evac to 4 forward positions. No one asked for my opinion. They didn't even look at me. Until I stepped forward and laid out a plan I'd written the night before. 2 backup routes, local relay support, precise timing based on satellite weather. They blinked, then nodded, then followed it to the letter. No one remembered my name, but every one of those forward teams got what they needed. That night, I went back to my tent, took off my uniform top, and folded it slowly, pressed the sleeve crease with my hands. Then I wrote 3 words on a scrap of paper and slipped it into the inner pocket. Nobody died today. That was the beginning of the archive. At first, I didn't mean for it to become anything. I just kept the uniforms that felt like they carried something more than dirt. Each one from a different chapter, a different failure or rescue or lesson. I cleaned them, labeled them, stored them in vacuum-sealed bags. When I moved from base to base, I packed them with care, always last, to go in first, to come out. I never told anyone, because it wasn't for them. It was for the girl from Iowa who never thought she'd make it past basic. It was for the soldier who once cried in my office because I approved his emergency leave to see his dying mother. For the sergeant who threw up in my truck after combat and said nothing. For the medic whose hands shook after his first field surgery but still reached for the next one. Every uniform was a page in a story no one else would write down. When I was assigned to Fort Lincoln in Missouri 5 years ago, I finally asked for a space. Just a small room. Unused storage away from the armory. I cleaned it out myself, built the racks, bought the cedar bench. I called it a uniform archive in the paperwork. The request was approved with 0 ceremony. Most people thought I was just being sentimental. Walker's little closet, they called it. The supply captain's quirk, and I let them think that, because sometimes the quietest things are the most dangerous, the most enduring, the most honest. I rose through the ranks, never fast, never flashy, but steady. I didn't collect medals. I collected trust. When something sensitive needed to be routed, it came to me. When something broke, they called me. But even with 14 years of silent service, I never made the wall. You know the one. The hall in every base that has the framed photos, the plaques, the names. I never made it, because I didn't save a general's life or lead a charge through enemy fire. I just made sure everyone else got to do their job and come home alive. So when those officers laughed at my closet when they looked at it like it was a curiosity, I felt the sting not just of disrespect, but of forgetting. Like all those stories were dust. Like the people in those sleeves didn't matter. But they did. And they still do. That's why I keep their uniforms. Because someone has to remember. The first time someone mocked my archive to my face, it wasn't a stranger. It was someone I'd mentored. Lieutenant Paul Granger, fresh out of officer candidate school, sharp haircut, sharper mouth. He was assigned to logistics support during a domestic readiness cycle, and I took him under my wing. Taught him how to document transfers the right way, how to spot forged manifests, how to navigate base politics without losing your soul. He shadowed me for months. One afternoon, I brought him into the archive. I didn't do that often, but he had promise, and I thought maybe he should see what this job really means. Not the spreadsheets, not the acronyms, the people. I pulled out the 7th Uniform Desert Camo still stained along the hem. "This one belonged to Sergeant Rivas," I said. "He stayed on an extra 3 hours during a blackout in Kandahar to cover a field unit's resupply. Never told anyone. He died 6 months later in a flood mission in Georgia." Granger nodded, smiled faintly. I thought he understood. 2 days later, I passed him outside the chow hall, standing with 2 other junior officers. I heard him before he saw me. "Yeah, she's got this creepy closet of dead people's jackets," he was saying. "It's like her little shrine. Old Captain Walker's trophy wall." They laughed, and something in me cracked. Not because of the words. I'd heard worse, but because I had given him access. I had trusted him, and he'd reduced everything in that room to a punchline. I didn't confront him. I didn't need to. He looked up, saw me, face froze, mouth shut. I just kept walking. But that night, for the first time in years, I didn't go into the archive. I left it locked. I sat in my barracks room with the lights off, wondering if maybe they were right. Maybe it was strange. Maybe I was holding on to something no one else cared about. The next week, I submitted a proposal, one I'd worked on for months. Living Uniform Archive and Silent Service Exhibit. A voluntary program, honoring unrecognized support personnel across active military installations. It included detailed photos, narratives, samples of tags, and testimonials from 2 retired officers who had donated their own pieces to the closet. I sent it through the proper channels with the required endorsements. And I waited. 3 weeks passed, then 4. Then I received the official response, "Recommend denial. No observable strategic value." They didn't even spell my name right. No observable value. That phrase haunted me. What did they think we were doing here? This wasn't a museum about stitches and buttons. It was a story, their story. The ones no one else wrote down. The ones without headlines. The following day, I overheard another conversation outside the admin building. 2 captains were chatting about promotions, laughing about the woman with the closet full of costumes. "She's gonna retire with a cardboard box and a scrapbook," one of them said. My fists clenched in my pockets. I didn't want a plaque. I didn't need a building named after me. But I had wanted it to mean something. Had I been wrong? Maybe it was just a pile of old uniforms. Maybe I'd spent over a decade curating a silent monument to lives no one would remember. That night, I sat alone in the archive. I turned off the lights. Just sat in the dark, surrounded by fabric and forgotten names. And then I pulled out the 10th uniform. Olive green. Lightweight. Torn along the shoulder seam. I ran my fingers inside the lining. There it was. A note sewn in with faded thread. I'd almost forgotten it was there. Thanks for never forgetting who I was. It was from Marla Dean. She was my first field partner. We worked the Red River operation together. She once told me she felt safest when I was on comms duty because you don't miss details, Walker. Ever. She retired in 2019. We lost touch. Last year, I found out she'd taken her own life. No service, no obituary. Her family said she wasn't the same after her deployments. I had saved her uniform, and she had known it. The fabric slipped from my fingers, crumpling softly into my lap. That was the moment, the lowest one, because I realized something I hadn't admitted even to myself. I wasn't just saving these for history. I was saving them for me. So I wouldn't disappear. So I wouldn't be forgotten either. So there would be proof that I had been here, that I had done something that mattered. And now it felt like no one wanted to see it. I considered shutting the closet down, packing it up, donating the uniforms to storage, burning the tags. It would be easier than sitting in this room and wondering if I'd wasted 14 years folding ghosts. But then, a knock at the door. I didn't answer. But it opened anyway. A young corporal, nervous, thin. He looked around, startled. I heard you kept records, of uniforms, of people." I blinked. Said nothing. He stepped in slowly, pulled a neatly folded jacket from his pack, held it out. "My brother wore this," he said. "He was in your division. Killed last spring. They didn't recover much, but I thought, maybe you'd want it." I stood up, took it, smoothed the sleeve, and just like that, like lightning behind my ribs, I remembered. It mattered, even if only to one, even if only in silence. After the corporal left, I sat in the dark for hours. The jacket he'd given me rested across my lap, standard issue navy blue crisp at the collar but frayed at the cuffs. The tag inside read, R. McCready, no rank, no unit, just a name. I turned it over in my hands again and again, trying to feel something. Pride, purpose, even grief. But what I felt was exhaustion. Bone-deep, soul-draining exhaustion. 14 years of service, and what did I have to show for it? A room full of fabric no one asked for. A dismissed proposal. Whispered jokes behind my back. Empty chairs at meetings where I once believed my ideas mattered. And now this the brother of a dead soldier handing me the last thing that still held his scent. Because I'm the one who remembers, because no one else would. I stood up, carefully laid the jacket in a fresh case, and slid it into the rack beside the others. I wrote his name on a tag. I didn't know his story yet. I just wrote R. McCready, one of ours. Then I locked the door behind me and walked out into the cold. I thought I'd feel lighter. Instead, I felt like I'd sealed myself inside a story I didn't believe in anymore. That weekend, I drove home to Iowa without telling anyone. 6 hours of silence, no music, no phone calls, just the hum of the tires and the haunting thought, what if I'm the only one keeping this alive and no one will notice when it dies? I pulled into my childhood driveway just before midnight. The porch light was on. My dad, now retired and slower in the knees, stood waiting in his robe like I was 17 again and past curfew. He didn't ask why I was there. He just opened the door and said, "You hungry?" I nodded. We didn't talk much over the meal. He made grilled cheese and tomato soup, my favorite as a kid. Halfway through, he looked at me over his glasses and said, "You still doing that uniform thing?" I stiffened. I was ready for another joke. Another comment about how I should have gone corporate like Jake. But he didn't smile. Instead, he said I told a guy at the Legion about it. He said it's the kind of thing they should have done after NAM. Said maybe fewer guys would have been forgotten. My spoon paused in midair. I thought it was weird at first, he admitted. Folding clothes, storing jackets. But then I remembered something. He stood up, walked to the hallway closet and pulled out an old beat-up duffel. Opened it on the table. Inside was his uniform. Olive drab, wrinkled, smelled faintly of mothballs and thyme. He pulled out a patch. "This came off the shoulder after your uncle died." I sewed it back on that night. Never told anyone. He placed it gently on the table between us. I kept it because no one else would. Thought that was weakness. Then he met my eyes. Maybe it was strength. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. But I stayed 2 extra days. We didn't talk about the Army again. We just sat on the porch and watched the leaves fall like they always did. When I returned to base, something in me had shifted. Not fixed, but cracked open. And it didn't help that the day I got back, I found out we'd lost another one. Corporal Janice Vega, 27 years old, motor accident, off duty, no next of kin. I found her jacket the next morning, crumpled in a laundry bag tagged for donation. They were going to throw it away. I took it to the archive. I pressed the wrinkles out myself, stitched the shoulder where the fabric had torn, wrote her name on a tag with the smallest, neatest handwriting I could manage. And then I sat down. I sat there for an hour and stared at the wall. And I thought, what happens when I'm gone? When the one person who remembers the stories is no longer there to tell them, that's when I knew. It couldn't just be a room anymore. It had to be something bigger, something permanent, and I couldn't wait for permission to build it. Because the Army doesn't hand you legacy. You carve it out yourself, one sleeve at a time. The Army doesn't hand you legacy. You build it. One name, one thread. One act of quiet defiance at a time. And so that's what I did. I stopped waiting for validation from commanding officers, from committees, from the voices that once made me shrink. I stopped asking to be seen. Instead, I started documenting. Seriously. First, I created a spreadsheet, not just names and dates, but full stories. Every uniform I'd kept, every soldier it had belonged to, every mission or memory I could gather. I pulled reports, scanned emails, tracked down former unit members. Sometimes I only had a name and a faded patch. Other times I found old letters, jokes, scribbled on tags, even voice memos. I began reaching out quietly, respectfully to the families of the fallen. Would you like your loved one's uniform to be part of an archive that honors silent service I didn't promise exposure or awards? Just remembrance. Many said yes. Some cried. A few told me no, and I honored that too. Within 3 months, the closet that had once held 15 jackets held 46, each one folded with care. Each one tagged, logged, and stored in a temperature-controlled case I built myself using old tech equipment boxes and insulation tape. Next came the digital backup. I uploaded records first on an encrypted drive, then to a small secure portal on the base server. Password protected, accessible only by command and approved researchers. And then I made my first quiet gamble. I slipped a copy of the full proposal, revamped, renamed, and stripped of all the bureaucratic fluff into the chaplain's office inbox. The Living Closet, a legacy archive of quiet service. I framed it not as a vanity project or logistical history, but as a place of healing for soldiers, for families, for the forgotten. A physical space where uniforms could speak for those who were too tired, too invisible, or too gone to tell their stories. The chaplain called me 3 days later. Captain Walker. He said this. This is more than storage. This is sacred. He didn't ask me for credentials. He asked me what I needed. I didn't say much. Just time and silence. He gave me both. The next month, he invited a small group of mental health officers and community liaisons to visit the room. No pomp, no speech. Just soft music playing from a Bluetooth speaker and the cedar bench placed beneath the backlight. I stayed in the corner, watched their faces, watched as a young counselor ran her fingers along a tag that read, L. Sutton, always brought coffee, never late. Watched as a major quietly folded one of the sleeves and whispered, I remember her, and I realized it had begun. The room was doing the work now. I was just the keeper, and that changed everything, because legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about what you leave behind that remembers others. A few weeks later, a junior officer I barely knew knocked on my office door. She looked nervous. Her fingers gripped a sealed uniform bag. I don't know if this qualifies, she said. It's mine. I'm still active. But I wore it during the flooding in Louisiana. It feels heavier than the rest. I took it from her without hesitation, hung it that afternoon. She came back 2 days later just to sit in the room. She didn't say a word, just sat, for almost an hour, then left. I started calling it the Living Closet, not a museum, not a gallery. A quiet place for those who carried things most people would never see. One day, I found a folded note in the inbox slot outside the room. No name, just a scribbled sentence my dad served. He was never honored. I think he would have liked this. Taped to it was an old patch sun-bleached fraying. I added it to the growing shadow box on the far wall, unclaimed but remembered. Not all legacies come with names. When word started to spread around the base, I knew it would eventually reach the higher-ups again. But this time, I didn't brace for rejection. This time, I was ready. Let them laugh. Let them joke. Because the next time someone said, that's it, just a little closet, they'd be standing in a room that had already whispered more than any metal ever could. And somewhere inside me, for the first time in years, I started to feel peace. I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. I was seeing. The uniforms, the people, the lives stitched into every seam. And myself. Finally. I knew the confrontation would come. I just didn't know it would arrive wrapped in dress blues and a clipboard. One Friday morning, a memo hit my desk, Senior Leadership Facility Walkthrough. Uniform archive room to be included. Signed by the new base CO. Expected guests 2 colonels, a major 3 civilian oversight officials. And General Harlan Briggs. I stared at the paper for a long time. Briggs was a name I knew everyone did. He'd served in 5 theaters, earned medals he didn't display, and spoke in clipped, deliberate sentences. His reputation was surgical, efficient, sharp, and unshakable. And now he was coming into my closet. Not a metaphor, not a memory. He was coming into the closet. The one they all once joked about. The one they used to call Walker's Fashion Project. The one they'd dismissed, minimized, and whispered about. I had 2 days to prepare. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I stayed late in the room alone. I cleaned the bench, polished the case latches, re-inked the faded tags. And then I did something I hadn't done before. I added my own uniform, the one from my first major operation. Still smelled faintly of rain and dust. I wrote my tag carefully, CPT, N. Walker. Always quiet, never late, still here. And I hung it at the very end of the row. For once, I stopped pretending I was just the keeper. I was also part of the legacy. The morning of the visit, I arrived early, hair tied, tight boots, shining hands steady. I wore my formal uniform not to impress them, but to remind myself I'd earned it. When the entourage arrived, I stood just outside the door, clipboard in hand. Standard procedure. I greeted them with a calm nod. Inside the room was silent, lit gently from beneath each case. Tags hung straight, uniforms at attention. No voiceover, no signage, just the weight of memory. The first few officers looked indifferent. A few tilted their heads. One murmured, "I didn't know this was real." Then a colonel chuckled, low, dry. "Seriously, this is what she built. A closet. That's it." A couple of the civilians smirked. My stomach turned, but I didn't blink. I just stood where I was, until I noticed movement behind them. General Briggs had stepped into the room, and he wasn't smiling. He walked slowly, hands behind his back, eyes sharp and scanning. He stopped in front of the fourth uniform in the row, bent slightly, read the tag. S. Holloway, never said much. Got us all home. He closed his eyes for half a second. Then he reached out, pulled the uniform down, held it, the fabric draped across his forearms like something sacred. And then he whispered, barely audible but deadly clear, "This is legacy." The laughter stopped. You could feel the silence press into every corner of the room like air had been sucked out. He turned to the colonel who'd laughed. "Did you serve with Holloway, no, sir?" the man muttered. "Then you don't speak here." He placed the uniform gently back in its case, smoothed the fabric, then turned to me. "Captain Walker," he said, his voice firm. "Where's yours?" I hesitated, then nodded toward the end of the row. He walked there himself, read the tag, then looked back at the room. "This," he said louder now, "is not a project. It's not decoration. It's not sentiment." He paused. "Let it land. This is a damn cathedral." No one laughed after that. When the group left, General Briggs lingered. He walked up to me, and for a moment I saw something behind his eyes. Tiredness, maybe. Or memory? "You've done what most people can't," he said. "What's that, sir?" "You made them remember the ones they'd already forgotten." Then he leaned in, slightly lowered his voice like he didn't want anyone else to hear it. "Most soldiers die twice. Once in body, once when no one says their name anymore." He glanced at the rows behind me. "You've delayed the second." And then with a soft nod, he was gone. That night I unlocked the archive again, sat on the bench, ran my fingers along the fabric of McCready's jacket, Sutton's tag, Holloway's sleeve, and then I touched my own. For years I'd believed this work made me invisible, but now I realized the truth. It made me unforgettable, not because I needed to be known, because I made others known again. Legacy wasn't what people said when you left. Legacy was what stayed standing after you were gone. And mine was built stitch by stitch from uniforms no one else wanted, from silence no one else honored, from names no one else remembered until now. They never laughed at the closet again. After General Briggs left that day, the ripple effect began almost immediately. Quiet, subtle, but unmistakable. Command approved an official designation for the room, the living closet, Archive of Silent Service. A plaque was installed outside the door, etched in matte black metal. Legacy is not loud. It is lived, no fanfare, no ceremony. Just the quiet recognition of something that had always been real, now finally seen. And for the first time in my career, people started arriving not because they were told to, but because they wanted to. A young medic stopped by with her first field uniform. She placed it on the bench, folded it with trembling hands, and said, "I was scared every day I wore this, but I never quit." A retired sergeant brought his son, walked him through the rows, and whispered stories behind each tag he recognized. His voice cracked when he saw one that said simply, "M. Jacobs, quiet hands, saved 3, told no one." No. I sat on the bench with new recruits, some fresh from basic, some back from deployment. I listened as they spoke, not about battles or medals, but about the people they carried with them, the ones who cracked jokes at midnight, the ones who ran toward danger without being asked, the ones who wrote no goodbyes, and I realized that I'd never been the only one who remembered. I'd just been the first to admit it out loud. 3 months later, a letter arrived from Army Public Affairs. They wanted to feature the archive in an internal documentary series titled The Hidden Hands of Service. I hesitated. It wasn't that I didn't appreciate the offer. It was that legacy to me had never been about cameras. But I said yes, on one condition. They couldn't name me as the founder, just the caretaker. They agreed. The video aired on the secure network 2 weeks later. It was simple 5 minutes soft lighting, a steady narration over rows of uniforms and the rustle of fabric, but it changed something. I started getting letters, not emails, not messages, letters, handwritten ones, folded with care, some from strangers, some from family members, some from soldiers I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. One letter from a retired lieutenant I barely remembered simply said, "I thought no one saw us." "You did." "Thank you." Another came from a mother who had lost her son in a helicopter crash. She wrote, "He wore that uniform for 4 years. I never knew where it went. Knowing it's in your closet makes me feel like part of him is still here. I kept every single one in a binder marked Echoes. Because that's what legacy really is, not a roar. An echo that keeps coming back long after you've left the room. I still walk past the closet every morning, still unlock it myself, still straighten sleeves and dust shelves and press creases into fabric worn by people stronger than I'll ever be. But now I see something else too. A small group of volunteers, officers, enlisted, even civilian staff have started helping. Not because they were assigned, because they believe in it, because they understand. And every so often, one of them will add a note to the community board in the corner for Corporal Devine, always saying in the truck, "Miss you." To Sergeant T, "Your story saved more than you knew." LT, Walker, first one to believe in me. That last one stopped me cold, because for years I'd been collecting the stories of others, never realizing that I'd become part of theirs. I used to think I was building something for the forgotten. Now I know I was building it for all of us. I don't know how long I'll stay here. Maybe I'll retire next year. Maybe not. But when I do go, I already know what I'll leave behind. Not a ceremony, not a party. Just one uniform hung at the end of the row. One tag written in the same small, neat handwriting, CPT. Nora Walker, keeper of threads. She remembered us. That's enough for me. Because I've learned that the most powerful thing you can do in a world built on noise is to make silence sacred, to say you mattered, even if no one else ever said it to your face, to fold a sleeve like you're holding a life, to leave behind something that whispers, even when you're gone, "We were here, we served, we were never just uniforms." And maybe someday when some bright-eyed recruit walks into that room, eyes wide, unsure of their place in the world, they'll pause in front of a worn jacket with frayed cuffs, and they'll whisper, "This is legacy."